take the 15th hour of our 24-hour conversation, and we are happy to host Sara Fenske Bahat. I hope the pronunciation was correct, but
Perfect.
in case I ask you, great. Sara is chair at the DMBA at California College of Arts and Yerba Buena Center for Arts in San Francisco. Well, Sara, could please tell us what, especially the Center for Arts of Yerba Buena Center, what they are devoted for, please?
Sure, of course. YBCA, which is the acronym, is a center in San Francisco dedicated to art by and for the community. It was actually created as a part of a eminent domain project to expand the downtown of San Francisco, and the trade-off for making some land that was previously used by the Filipino community available for commercial use was to create a center that would be invested in showing the work of the community for the community. So it's across the street from San Francisco's Museum of Modern Art, all of its galleries, and it's really, really dedicated to contemporary art practice that is deeply involved in equity and justice in the various communities of San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Oh, great. So it's and I was reading your well the statement your professor. There is a sentence that I really found well, it's itself a message. So there
What
is
did I say?
well, it's great because it's very powerful. Design is no longer elective, rather a moral imperative to build better and more equitable system. This is a leadership opportunity for many of us. Well, what it's like if we do we can do the conversation talking about time and weather, because it's everything is there.
I mean, it really has become clear to me during this. I came to design from economics and political science. I came later in life, and I found that I got really frustrated in government and in banking with everyone who had the right answer for things. And when I found design, I was so excited to find a community of people who could really get into the how we might do things. So I call it show, don't tell. And especially over the last year and a half that we've all had together, like as a global community, right? We've really had to respond and come to terms with some systems that are not working for us. I really love that we as designers, we understand how to make things better. We understand how to listen. We come from a place that I think is optimistic. And so if we have all these systems that aren't working, I'm of the mind that we can rebuild them to work for us. And that in that mandate, we can really find leadership in a way that I think some of us have been able to find in the past, but where we can really elevate the profession and do a lot of good for the world in the process, and probably have some fun. Maybe we can make everything more like open and fun again.
No, but well, in your now you mentioned a couple of terms that are extremely important, like well, of course, it's very the idea of a community, and the design is dealing with it's part of a community and is dealing with a community and is working for a community, and the idea of having a community as our goal in a certain way is extremely well. It's part of the design since the beginning of the history of design, but especially in the last year became extremely important, especially in the last years and absolutely in the last year. Let's see, and from the other side, the idea of a professional, what those relations between the community and social aspect and dealing with a political question of leadership also, do you think that is more concerning the world of research, academic world of research, or is also in the professional field of design?
It's an interesting question. I mean, to me, professional practice is more flexible and easier to experiment with than research, unless you mean user research, right? Which is, of course, I think always a part of what we do. But I think of policy as design. I think about programs as design. In fact, like I have a pretty expansive view of what I think a designer might look like or be. These days, I've begun to realize that community organizers are in some ways the original designers. They have all the same skills that we have. They just operate in ways that, you know, are not defined by big D design. And I think we're all better off if we acknowledge that we can have different job descriptions and call each other different things. But if we acknowledge that we're all practicing using some of the same skills. And so for me, practice is more interesting than research, but that's because I like people and I like to get into the messiness with people. But, you know, I mean, I have plenty of colleagues who spend a lot of time in research and have a good time there too.
Well, as we are directly came into the main topic, I think that is very important and is very crucial. Also, the point of view that design is even more having a, or let's see, is even more playing a role at the table of politics and finance. Maybe we are more used to think that is it's more common, the idea of politics, due to the concept of working for a community. But I think that your idea of connecting also with finance is absolutely contemporary and urgent at the same time. Because if we think of what happened in the last years, let's see, from finance arrive a lot of big problem for all the world, and for the way in which I'm not an expert, but well, I think we have we all can read the news since in the last years, and maybe the way in which politics and finance are setting. It's time to redesign in a certain way, but please, I think that as that is our conversation, our 24 hours is this edition is especially focused on some topic that can push the new generation to think, to design in a different way. I really ask you to better explain your point of view on that dimension, please.
I feel like we could talk for the next 10 and a half hours or whatever it is, 9.5 hours. I mean, I came to design having left finance and politics, right? And I left those spaces not out of lack of success. I left them because I looked around and I didn't want to grow old with those people. I wanted to be more creative. I wanted to have a bigger impact. And I found design to be a sort of layer in my skill set that allowed me to do bigger, better work. And I certainly, you know, run a design MBA program because I believe that adding the skills that we teach into anyone's toolkit can help them do bigger, better work. We just reframed our curriculum so that every semester, we have 4 semesters, really delves into a set of identity questions, right? The first is around curiosity. The second is around complexity. The third, creativity. And the fourth is courage. There is work to be done in this world. And, you know, if you can't show someone what you mean and lead them along the way, which I believe is what designers do, you know, you're stuck offering PowerPoints of numbers to justify decisions. And while we all know that those PowerPoints are sometimes necessary to justify decisions, they're not encouraging. They're not exciting. They're not, you know, compelling and make you want to wake up and go to work every day in the way that listening to people and collaborating with people and sharing a common experience trying to get there can be. And so I'm trying to raise classes of students who are brave enough to put together their skills and their life experience to go do the thing. And I don't necessarily have an opinion on what doing the thing was. In my own life, the thing that I'm working on now, I mean, YBCA and CCA, I have very different roles. In one, I run a program, and the other, I chair a board. So I have very different power and sort of subtlety of influence in those two roles. The exciting thing that we're doing at YBCA is a guaranteed income for artists, right? San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the country. And the mayor has decided she wanted to experiment with a guaranteed income to artists. And so we, this community art institution, are the organization that is distributing that money to see what happens when you really provide a regular, consistent income to the creative people in our community. And so, to me, that's really interesting. I have this conflict sometimes teaching at this College of Art and Design in this very expensive place where it's difficult to be a practicing artist. And so, or any kind of maker, right? An architect, a jewelry maker, a ceramicist, it doesn't really matter. But I find it really, really interesting to think about what would it take to invest in this ecosystem so that the people that we educate can remain here and the community can benefit from their creativity. Europe has it much better than we do on that front. So that's one thing. And then I guess my other big observation in this space is if we're talking about being courageous and using your skills and talents, not to the maximum point of disruption, I wouldn't say, but, I think we all want to live to our full potential. I've over the last year had to really acknowledge that I had more to give. And I became the chair of a board, and the ways that boards used to work, like guys with gavels and all this orderliness, it didn't really feel right to me. I'm not that, sort of official and formal of a person, despite having worked in banking and government. And so I just decided that we were going to do things differently. We could still be as responsible as those formal places with the gavels, but we were going to be a more collaborative governing institution for the organization. And that really, realizing that I could do that and that I had the power to do that was an interesting realization. I'm an academic, so I don't find myself with that kind of power all the time. But I realized that the more of us find ourselves in leadership positions, the more we can play with leadership, right? The more we can adapt the governance of institutions to be more reflective of the communities that they're serving. And to me, there's a lot of meat in that work. I don't think that the world looks like the guys with the gavel. We talk a lot in the United States, especially about needing our boards to look more like the communities they serve. And that's a great goal. I love that goal. But once they do, they also need to operate differently. Nobody wants to live in the land of the gavel with all the control that implies. And so what I hope that I'm adequately doing is raising a generation of our students to be brave enough to go after the thing. And then when they get the thing, to feel confident to play around with it a little bit and try to do the most good that they can.
Well,
I wouldn't say it's easy. I did have to go look around for other board chairs to see if anyone else was doing this crazy stuff. And the answer is no. But the interesting thing I learned along the way is I found this really wonderful American choreographer, whose name is Liz Lerman, who's developed a method of critique that she started to use with boards. So she uses it with Yale, and she's used it with Northwestern academic boards. And we started using it as a board at our YBCA board meetings. It's like a consent-oriented critique, right? If I made something, I get to control the types of feedback that I want, and I don't have to hear the types of feedback I don't want. There is a man on this board who runs risk at Wells Fargo, one of the big American banks, one of the biggest American banks. And he said to me, close colleague of mine, he says, I can't even imagine what would happen if we did this in our boardroom and on our senior leadership team. And I'm like, Dave, you should try it, And so I think there are the formal ways in which I am using the skills that I recruit over time. I'm teaching them. And then there are the subtle ways in which I'm trying to bring my colleagues along with me.
No, well, you are describing a situation that, well, that remind me of, I think, a common friend, and I want to mention him, Barricades, that was part of the conversation of our 24-hour last year. Well, I was surprised because I was looking at Barry delivering a lecture, well, a speech about the system of the Silicon Valley, you know, and the design system of Silicon Valley was within the design system of Silicon Valley. Barricades include the lawyer, well, the startup, design, and so on. But at the same time, lawyer were included by default, and was very strange at that time from an Italian point of view and European point of view. And then I came to Barry and said, why? He said, you cannot start you cannot start an entrepreneur, well, a company without a lawyer. A lawyer is part of the company by definition. And so we had a long long discussion also to how the local the context has some influence on what we think about design and so on. And now you were talking on you were saying that in Europe there were some differences, and I think that I'm sure you know the two situations, and I'm very curious because when you mention the involvement of design in the leadership role, let's see, that was politics or finance, I think that probably the local context play an important role on that topic. Thinking about Europe or let's say Italy in that sense, or California, and maybe especially the San Francisco area and Silicon Valley. What do you think about?
I mean, I think, I guess what I was trying to say is that I think Europe generally, I mean, I spent a little time in Brussels, so I guess I'm referring to Europe, not, I don't know how you refer to it, but like EU Europe, not just Europe, the continent. I feel like the funding of the arts is so much stronger than it is in the United States. And so I feel there's an investment made in arts ecosystems in communities that is very difficult to replicate in the US. I guess I feel like it's interesting. Barry and I did a session earlier this year with the University of Tokyo's Innovation School. And when we did that session, we compared the Silicon Valley sort of culture, and you know, that is its own thing, right? It is a culture where everybody's trying to do something new to improve upon the thing that was done before. So it is very design friendly as a culture, and design forward, right? You know, Steve Jobs is our patron saint, and the founders of Airbnb, who are also designers, are not far behind. So, you know, there is a culture of designers or design forward executives making a lot of money, creating successful companies, and really having a cultural impact, I think, on the United States. From the point of view of like, I feel sometimes in California, like we're dealing 10 years in the future of the rest of the country, right? There are companies that are big companies in Silicon Valley that nobody has heard of yet. And by the time everybody else has heard from them, you know, there's tens of thousands of employees. But Silicon Valley is a small place, relatively speaking. You know, San Francisco has under 1 million people, whereas New York has 9 million people. You know, you run into people you know on the street all the time. And so what I would say about that is just, it is in the culture of Silicon Valley to take breaks, to reflect, to try things, And it's a very forgiving place professionally for people to do that. We also tend to throw away ideas that don't work pretty quickly. And the conversation with Japan was really interesting because with them, we were looking at companies, traditional Japanese family-run companies that had been around for centuries. And looking at the ways in which a company can be around for centuries, family-run, reinvesting in its community, is almost the opposite of Silicon Valley. But over the course of a week, we were looking at the ways they connect and the ways in which, we might learn from them and they might learn from us. And so, I think every community in the United States has its own professional ecosystem and ecosystem of ideas. The Bay Area has a really interesting overlap of technology and social justice. People come to the Bay Area to be free in a very real way, and they have for generations, and sustainability, right? And so you put those things together, and there is a pretty high level of optimism and creativity and just willingness to try and a feeling of safety in trying. And so I think that's the way the Bay Area is really unique. In California, I would say there is a similar impulse, but Los Angeles is very different than San Francisco, right? Los Angeles is driven by entertainment. And that is a different thing. It shares some qualities, especially in terms of, we have this thing that we say in our family. My husband's a venture capitalist, that your career is more, it's less about having a profession and more about a portfolio of projects. Like, that is a very California thing. That is not a New York thing. When I had my children and took 2 years off, my colleagues in New York thought I was crazy. And in San Francisco, it's like, what? We take 2 years off just to recover from our startup. It's fine. And it is this project-based approach, that can lead to an investment over time, but it does create a lot more flexibility, which I think is really interesting on its own. I would just say, if it's the last thing I would offer, lawyers are pretty essential. Not just because you want a good one to make sure that your documents are in shape, but Silicon Valley lawyers are also known for open sourcing their documents. And so in this way, this cluster of lawyers has disaggregated themselves from making money by kind of redesigning how much time they spend with early stage companies by making those documents publicly available, which I think is really interesting. And so, just to further this point of culture, like, everyone's kind of up for it and trying. And that's a pretty nice thing in the design community.
Yes, and well, at the end, it seems that what we can, the idea that anyone can learn from each other, that we can learn from each other at different levels, from the level of the big scale of cultural, like you mentioned, the maybe Japanese tradition of the companies, centuries company from the young startup. I think at the same time we can learn from each other, and that's one of the I have to say that that's one of the reasons also to the conversation, to the 24-hour that we are carry on, the idea that we can learn from each other, because anyone has a history and in which we can discover something new, and at the same time, well, we can also that an important part is to focus on the real people, of the person that I mean, we can talk about topic and we can share papers about topics, but then to discuss about topics became a different different things. And you start with your stories from a kind of contest that was different, and then you move, not, as you say, for not be successful, but just because you change your focus probably. And as a way to learn, I ask you, from which have been the milestone of your, or the events that provoke the change and the new direction of your career, or maybe the lucky meeting, or which have been the point?
I mean, I think that somebody asked me this morning in a slightly different way. I was, as a young child, like nobody paid attention to what I was doing, right? I didn't have anyone hovering over me telling me what to do. And so I really developed a sense of adventure and independence. And in a way, I wouldn't say I was fearless, but I was probably careless. And, I just kept trying things until I found things I liked. I loved art and I loved math. My mom is a costume designer and my father is an accountant, right? And so I had all these influences happening. I was in Brussels and then I was in London for graduate school, and I moved to New York where I didn't know anyone. But I knew that if I wanted to move back to the US, I had to be in New York. It was the only place that a sane American would try to live. I now feel a little differently, but at the time. And I was amazed because within a year, I had gone from taking the first job I could find to finding a job I really loved. And I got promoted a bunch. And then I tried the next thing. And then I tried the next thing. And for me, there's like this really intuitive feeling around in the dark for the thing that feels satisfying to you. And really both using information that you gather along the way, but just your sense of self to figure out what spaces you want to occupy, what choices you make in terms of what projects you take on and which you don't. And so for me, I would say my milestones are less about being identified by anyone else as they are about me finding my own way and learning to just listen to that voice and to trust that voice and, find ways to make the curiosity work. For lack of a better way of putting it. Sometimes that meant I had 3 jobs because I had to go do this thing. And I was okay with that because I had to go do the thing. And so I kind of look at it as collecting a set of experiences to make sure that you feel like you're fully living and that you enjoy what you do every day. I'm currently in an adventure in the middle of the country because we spent the whole year on computers and I wanted to spend the summer mostly off the computer. And I spent 3 hours this morning gardening. I never garden. It's not something I do. But after all this time in front of the screens, I just wanted time to be away. And I haven't asked myself the question, I don't really have to, why do I feel that way? I know why I feel that way. And I'm just going to go try this thing to see if it helps me find my center in a way that, makes it possible for me to return to screens a little bit in the fall. And so that's all I have. It was good for me early in my career to be identified as like a smart person by smart people that I knew trusted me and promoted me a lot. And I think that gave me the confidence to go explore.
Well, the confidence is also the confidence that it's a positive message what you say, because getting the confidence of facing one of the point of the new generation, and that is also clear defined on the statement of the 24 hour is relate to the uncertain condition of our contemporary times. It seems that uncertainty doesn't you are not afraid about uncertainty, uncertain condition, let's say. It seems that you face uncertain condition more or less fearless, isn't it?
I mean, I tend to like the messy stuff. I don't like it when things are predictable. And so I don't know what to do when things are not messy, honestly. And so I think for me, I found a profession where messy is part of the job. We get messy all the time and we try to make sense of things. And, I'm 45. When I was 25, I didn't know that. When I was 30, I started to know that. When I was 35, I thought I knew most of it, but I think the older you get also, the more sure of yourself you can be that, all these steps along the way made sense. And you come to see the things that maybe scare you a little bit about yourself as your superpowers. So I would just encourage everybody to do the things that scare you a little bit, because they're probably going to be your superpower.
But that's a very great message, and it seems that we can do that. You should be strong enough to face situation in which you don't know what to do, because if you feel strong enough, probably you find you be involved, you get you find.
Well,
a
that's how you
solution.
grow. That's how you grow, right?
Great.
It's an inside job.
Great. Thank you for your time. Time run. We are at the end of our 30 minutes. Thank you for sharing your experience and to push us to think at new, let's see, new ways to do and to be designer.